Hello and welcome back to the Future Value Podcast. I'm John Pellosie, and as always, we're here with Joe Freemont and Justin Ahner. Today, we're going to be covering a really important topic for families, and it has really significant financial implications, but it also has a lot of impact in all other areas of their lives. And we're going to start our conversation today about what we call education planning, and specifically higher education planning, right? College, trade school, graduate school, all those kinds of things. And we really want this video to be a resource both for young people, maybe who are in their high school years, who are trying to figure out what they want that path to be, but also, of course, to their parents and their family members, right? And people who are going to be having conversations with those young folks about those decisions. So that's the focus of what we're going to cover today. And I'm going to turn it over to Joe Freemont, if I can, to kick us off.
Of course. So I think post-secondary education is really a special time of life, really, because if you think about it, you're born, you spend time with your mom and your family, right? You go to school, preschool, and then you have K through 12. And really, it's the point after high school where your life starts to open up, and that decision on whether you're going to go to a trade school or some other form of post-secondary education is really the launching pad of the trajectory of your life, really. So I think there's a lot of important decisions that you have to make when you're deciding on that next location, right? Maybe you've taken some opportunities to have learn a trade in high school, and you're saying, okay, yeah, I've got that introduction and I want to start by going to a trade school. But for those of us who decide to go to maybe a community college or a 4-year traditional master's degree school, there's a lot of decisions that are not necessarily financial in nature. So we, the finance guys, are going to let you know about some of those non-financial factors, right? So first off, location. I think this is the most popular one. This is the one I hear about the most with my clients. Well, my kid said that school that makes perfect sense on paper is just 15 minutes away. It's way too close. They don't want mom and dad showing up, right?
Right.
So is it too close? Is it too far? Are you hopping on a plane? Is it going to cost $1,000 to get on a plane and go across the country every time you want to go to school? Or is it just right? Like the tale of the Goldilocks and the Three Bear, right? But also, do you want a school in the city, right? Do you want to be able to walk everywhere? Not necessarily in the city, but you have a lot of stuff access there. And also, do you want to see some trees maybe and maybe some grass? Those are some important decisions, so you can go out and touch some grass when you're not studying, hitting the books in the library. Another important consideration is the size of the school, right? Some people we're in the great state of Pennsylvania, love Penn State. There is a ton of students at Penn State. Or are you looking for more of that small school feel where maybe everyone knows your name and whatnot? That also goes with, do you want a state school? Do you want a private school? Does that align with your values that you have, right? But also, when you're doing that research process on what school you want to go to, does the program align with what you want to do, right? Do you have a thought of what you want to do after school to get that JOB? And is that school specialized in the field that you want to study, right? There's a lot of degrees out there, right? I'm going to pick on finance or just business in general. Pretty much every school has a business program, right? And some schools claim to be better or more prestigious than others, but at the end of the day, it is a sheet of paper, right? You could get a degree at any school in that given field. It's just a matter of, does it give you more connections or whatnot? I'm going to turn it over to Justin here.
Yeah, so going back a couple steps here, I'll share a personal story of kind of my decision process. So in high school, I feel like this is some relatable story for a lot of people. Trying to talk to the guidance counselor and figure out what's my next step. Unfortunately for me, I had one of those guidance counselors that was thinking about vacation and what time quitting time was, and not about what I was asking about. So unfortunately, I didn't have a lot of guidance in high school on those next steps. So actually, my dad put me in touch with a counselor, an individual third party. And it was a really good process. They went a lot more in depth and asked a lot of those same questions that Joe had listed earlier. Do you want to be in the city? Do you want to be rural? Do you want to be close or far from family? Now, those are all things that they asked me. And for me particularly, growing up in rural Pennsylvania, I like to stay rural. I know what I'm good at. I'm not good in the city. And I didn't want to be too far from home, but I didn't want to be 15 minutes away.
Right.
So I actually ended up going to Shippensburg, which is about 2 hours away from home for me. It was that perfect blend of rural, but close enough to some other major towns that you could go and do things. You weren't stuck in the middle of nowhere. But getting back to that program, they really went in depth into what I wanted to do, for personal experience as well as what degree I wanted to pursue eventually. And they did that through some aptitude tests. So there was a couple different tests that they had me take to help determine, things that I was interested in, what skills that I have, and kind of match that to some positions that would likely be good for me. And I'll share, finance was actually not number one for me. My number one was actually engineering, and particularly petroleum engineering.
Okay.
So in high school, at the tail end of high school, I was planning on being a petroleum engineer, which is quite the departure from finance. But some of the things that I was interested in that field was the travel piece. As a petroleum engineer, you travel around the country and to other countries as well to help develop and implement some of the drilling and pipelines and those types of things. But ultimately, that was one of the things that led me away from it because I do eventually want to have a family, and that's a tough field to be in. So that's kind of my story. How I came back to finance ultimately was probably number 2 or number 3 on that list. And it really checked all those boxes of things I'm interested in, things I'm good at, and the quality of life that I ultimately want to have in the future.
Excellent. And I think that's a great example, Justin, too, when you're talking about working with that counseling to help identify all of those, we said non-financial items that are important for education. But I would say they do have a financial impact as well because, outside of the price of college, and we'll talk about that later, and the price of higher ed, if somebody makes a decision to pursue something and it ends up not being the right fit, maybe they go to a school for whatever reason that isn't a good fit for them. Well, that can very easily end up in wasted dollars, right? I think we've all seen it from our time in schools where we have people in our classes, maybe they were there for a year or a semester, in some cases, just a couple months, and they find out it's not for them. And hopefully they figure that out quickly, right? But those more qualitative pieces can very easily have financial impact, right? If people aren't taking the time to find that good fit. Mm-hmm. And that leads me to another thought, which is I think we have in our society moved to a model where higher education is something that happens very much right after high school in a lot of cases. And for a lot of people, that's just the path, right? Is you graduate high school, you go on to a 4-year college. It's an expectation, and it's really almost oppression. And I think the problem with that is, first of all, that they may not align with that 18-year-old's goals or dreams. It may frankly not align with their maturity level, right? It takes a certain kind of mindset. It takes a certain level of maturity, I would say, to want to be in your kind of traditional 4-year college. And someone may just not be ready for that. I think it's important that we evaluate that, and families have a conversation about that, an honest conversation, and say, hey, you know what? Maybe it's better, even if college is the future for this particular person and what they want to study, maybe it's better if we do something else to get started. Whether that's just working for a time in some field or another, whether that's going to, more like your community college, right? And getting an associate's degree or something like that, where it's a little bit perhaps more manageable, and that sort of thing. I just think that's really important. And I would say that was very, very common you know, and when you look back in history, it was very normal for people to go to college later on in life, right? Later sometimes into their 30s or even beyond that, right? And they would have working experience before that. So I think that's something I would tell people too, is it doesn't have to be the decision that gets made right away, you know, before high school graduation, that you have to go in this particular direction. You know, if it takes time, it takes time. I think the important thing, and I think parents would agree, the important thing is that their child is doing something productive, right? They're learning a skill, they're working, maybe they're taking some class. As long as they're kind of making progress, I think that's the most important thing.
I think you bring up a great point, John. I think most people will find, especially if you find out that post-secondary education is not for you, the credits at community college are much cheaper than if you go to another school. And I think that brings up a great point, talking about the return on interest, or return on investment rather, of your 4-year degree or whatever degree that you choose to pursue, right? You should have some idea in mind on, okay, if I'm going to get a degree in X, I should expect to earn anywhere from here to here. And I should compare that to, well, how much is this degree going to cost me really, right? Because ultimately there's a difference between what we would call a job, a job, and a career, right? A job is something that you go from 9 to 5 and you leave, and there's no growth opportunity there, right? I'm thinking, and there's nothing wrong with people who do this, right? But some of those minimum wage jobs that we think about, those are the ones that first immediately come to mind. Those are jobs. When you leave, that's it, right? But careers are something that you want to focus on, and it's going to be your life's passion, hopefully, right? And maybe that's a degree in business, and you're going to eventually become a manager, and so on and so forth. But really looking into, you know, I expect to make this. Well, is my college going to put me in a severe disadvantage coming out of school, or am I going to be okay based on the field that I picked, right? For some degrees, right, engineering, medical fields, it could be very lucrative, right? And for other degrees, not going to name any degrees in particular, but it's not as such, right? And let me be clear, we are not saying that you should only become an engineer or a doctor because you're looking to make a lot of money right out of school. You should really do it because you love to do that, right? And especially, you know, for somebody like myself, I can't stand the sight of blood, right? I should not be a doctor, because if I go to do some surgery or something and I see some blood and I pass out, it doesn't matter how much money I'm going to make on paper, because they're going to fire me the next day, right? So,
yeah, I think to your point, Joe, that is a good point. Like I think we want people to think about, you know, what they're passionate about and what they're good at, and not just one of those things, but both of those things when it comes to evaluating something like school, right? To your point, there's a lot of things that can earn a good living for you, but you just may not be suited for it. So it doesn't make sense to try to force it, right? If it's not going to be a good fit. And same thing for parents. I would encourage you, you know, I think often parents can have hopes and expectations for their children. Many times those are very, very good things and motivating things. Sometimes we see the case where those hopes and expectations put a burden on those children. Maybe it's a hope they'll go into a particular career field, right? Or go down a certain path, and it's just not the right path for them. I think it's good to be open. I think it's good to be honest with yourself and also with your child, to know maybe their strength lies elsewhere and in something else, and helping them figure out the way that's the best fit for them, right? Rather than, again, trying to push into any particular path. I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to build on that a little bit, when you are kind of figuring out, like, hey, what am I good at? What can I make some money at? And you're finding that overlap, when you're starting to pick that degree, there's really 2 ways you can go about that. There's what I'll call the surgeon approach, where you're really picking a very specific degree. I'm going to pick on one of my best friends from high school. He actually went to a tech college where he did plastic and polymer engineering.
okay.
So that is a very highly specialized degree that, you know, at the back end, there's not as many people with the degree, so that means you're more likely to get the job as long as they're there. So you have to make sure that the field isn't oversaturated, that there is plenty of opportunity there for you once you complete the degree. And then the other opportunity, or the other approach, is the shotgun approach. So this is an approach that a lot more people take of, I'm going to get a business degree, or I'm going to get a teaching degree, where you're taking something a little bit more generalized, but you can apply it to a lot more potential opportunity on the back end. Both approaches have their pros and cons, and that's something that you'll have to weigh based on what you're looking to pursue.
And I think one thing I would add at this particular point in time, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, is, there's, again, that balance of, 4-year college, bachelor's degree, or even advanced degrees beyond that, trade school, learning a skilled trade, that kind of work. And, there's a lot of opportunity in those spaces, in the skilled trades. There's a lot of demand. And so again, I would encourage folks, especially if, your child has an aptitude and interest and an excitement for that, to really explore that. I think, frankly, we know the numbers, we've heard numbers about, lifetime earnings at different education levels. But I think at this stage of where we're at in our country, it really gets more specific than that. I think you really have to start to look at not just if you went to this school or that school, but also what you study, right? What you study is hugely important for earnings. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, if there's a child out there who, like I said, has that aptitude and that interest in skilled trade, I would never want them to be forced into, or feel like they're being forced into, studying something else out of college, because the reality is they may not get a higher return on investment on that if they're studying something that doesn't fit. There are certain professions, like what we do for a living, that do require college, right? That's just kind of the rules of the game, and perhaps that's a conversation for another time and legislatively. But we have to go to college a certain way. We have to do certain things. But I think, again, it really, the important factor is not just what kind of school, but what you're actually studying and applying. And Joe, you had some really interesting stats on that.
Yeah, I would say, it's most certainly interesting, but it's actually kind of sad in nature, in fact. But the New York Federal Reserve came out with a study a couple years back, and they found that only 27% of undergraduate degree holders actually work in the field that they studied for. 27%, which is absolutely crazy, because that means that 73% of graduates are not working in the field that they study in. So almost 3/4 of all undergraduate degree holders are not studying or not working in the field that they studied for, which I think is particularly sad, right? Because that's a lot of money depending on the school that you went to. And, they don't account for those who went to graduate school and then maybe did something else and took a different direction there. But at the end of the day, it's a huge financial decision for you to go to school and to not even be potentially not even working in the degree that you got. It's a big thing.
So Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot with a question here, but given those numbers, what do you think are the contributors to that? Like, why do you think that number is so low?
Yeah, that's a great thought. So I think internships, like how much exposure that you actually got to the field that you're studying through it, right? I'll be honest, I did not have an internship in my 4 years as an undergrad, right? I actually got very lucky and got into the field, like by the grace of God, I found where I was supposed to be. But if you were thinking, okay, I'm going to be an accountant, and I never got an internship, or none of my classes had any tax preparation, and then I go right into tax prep and I go, oh my gosh, I don't like talking to clients. I should have been an auditor or something else. Or, you know what, this is all so boring. My parents forced me into this field. That's it, I'm doing something else, right? I think deciding for yourself, getting that experience and trying different things while you're in school, right, is an important factor there.
Yeah, so basically that difference between kind of the classroom environment where it's kind of the theoretical knowledge, which you need, but that can be very different from working in that as a career, right? Boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I would say too, coming back to earlier part of the conversation, just a 17, 18-year-old kid trying to make a decision about what do I want to do for the next 40, 50 years of my life, potentially. That's hard to make. And again, even myself, I thought I was going one way out of high school and quickly found out, hey, I don't want to go that way anymore. Fortunately for me, I figured that out pretty early on, but some people, they might not figure that out until junior or senior year. And at that point, unless you're going to start another degree, you're already kind of locked into that. I think that definitely contributes to that as well.
And there's great programs at colleges. My wife's a big fan of this one. It's the exploratory studies, right? It's really in that first 2 years when you're in school, they give you a kind of like the shotgun approach, right? You take a bunch of your education courses, but they also throw in a little bit of, oh, hey, here's a business class, here's a science class, here's something else. And whatever you find, and of course with the help of a member at the college, they say, hey, you've really enjoyed this, maybe you should consider taking into or studying X, Y, and Z. I think those programs are there for a reason, especially if you're spending that much money to be at school, right? You should definitely take advantage of it if you're uncertain.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is kind of part one of our higher education discussion. Next time, we're going to get a little bit more into the weeds on the financial aspects, right? Getting into that conversation about making financial decisions, right? Scholarships, loans, all of that kind of thing. So as we figure out the higher education journey for that up and coming member of society, how are we going to finance that in the best way? That's what we'll talk about next time. We look forward to joining you then. Take care.